My name is Frank. I've been driving rigs across this country for 40 years, long enough to see cities rise and fall. I remember the old Vegas, a town with a certain class, a certain danger. It had a soul. Now it's all corporate glitz and giant TV screens. But the ghosts of that old town are still there, if you know where to look. This story is about the night I made a delivery to one of them. It started with a strange job offer that came through on my dispatch app. It wasn't from one of the big carriers, it was a private contract from a third-party logistics company I'd never heard of. Starlight Express. The pay was exceptionally good for a simple single-item delivery within the city itself. The pickup was at a nondescript storage facility in an older part of North Vegas. The delivery address was listed as 3000 South Las Vegas Boulevard. The name of the recipient was simply The House. I picked up the cargo just after sunset. It was a single heavy man-sized wooden crate, completely unmarked except for a small stenciled star on the side. It took 2 warehouse guys and a forklift to get it into my trailer. It felt unnaturally heavy, dense, like it was made of solid lead. The warehouse manager, a tired-looking man with shifty eyes, just shrugged when I asked what was in it. "Don't ask, don't tell. That's the Starlight way," he said, before hurrying back into his office. The delivery instructions were bizarrely specific. Arrive at the destination no earlier than 3 a.m. and no later than 3:15 a.m. Leave the cargo by the west gate. Do not wait for confirmation. Do not speak to anyone you might see. Payment will be wired upon successful drop-off. As I drove towards the strip, I punched the address into my GPS, 3000 South Las Vegas Boulevard. My heart skipped a beat. I knew that address, every old-timer did. It was the address of the Stardust Resort and Casino. The legendary Stardust, the jewel of the mob-run era, imploded back in 2007. I drove past that spot all the time. It was nothing now but a massive, empty, fenced-off lot, waiting for some new mega resort to be built. I parked a block away and waited, the minutes ticking by. Vegas at 3 a.m. is a strange mix of manic energy and deep, weary sadness. But here, away from the main glow, it was just quiet and dark. At exactly 3:05 a.m., I pulled my rig up to the chain-link fence surrounding the vast, empty lot. I got out, the air strangely cold for a Vegas night. The site was a dark wound in the heart of the city, a flat expanse of dirt and gravel where a palace of light once stood. Using a pallet jack, I wrestled the heavy crate out of my trailer. It was even heavier than I thought, and it seemed to absorb the ambient light, looking like a block of pure darkness. I wheeled it over to the rusted gate that served as the western entrance. As I set it down, the air changed. The distant sounds of the strip faded away, replaced by something else. It was the faint, ghostly sound of a bustling casino. I could hear the clatter of 1,000 poker chips, the mechanical whir and jingle of slot machines, the murmur of a large, excited crowd, and underneath it all, the smooth sound of a live jazz trio. I stood there, frozen, listening to the phantom sounds of a casino that hadn't existed for over a decade. Then I started to see them. In the darkness of the empty lot, faint, shimmering figures began to appear. They were translucent like heat haze, dressed in old-fashioned suits and glamorous cocktail dresses from the 60s and 70s. They weren't looking at me. They were watching the crate. A figure detached itself from the ghostly crowd and shimmered into clearer focus near the gate. He was a tall man in a sharp suit, with slicked back hair and a cold, confident demeanor. He looked like one of the old pit bosses, a man who ran the show. He looked at the crate, then he looked directly at me. He didn't speak, but he gave me a single, sharp nod, a nod of confirmation, a nod of thanks. I finally understood. I wasn't making a delivery for a person. I was delivering something to the past. This wasn't a job. It was a ritual. I was a courier for the ghosts of a bygone era, returning something or someone that belonged to them. I got back in my truck, my hands shaking, and drove away. I didn't look back. A minute later, my phone pinged. The payment from Starlight Express had been wired to my account. If you were the driver, would you have tried to open the crate? Answer yes or no in the comments. My name is Maria. I'm a young driver, or at least I feel young in this industry. I'm skeptical by nature. I don't believe in ghosts or monsters. I believe in bad brakes and tired drivers. The road is dangerous enough without making things up. That's what I used to believe anyway. This happened on a long, straight stretch of I-15, heading north out of Las Vegas towards Utah. It was the dead of night, the city's glow a shrinking fire in my rearview mirror. The vast, empty Mojave Desert opening up before me. That's when I saw her. A woman hitchhiking on the shoulder of the interstate. It was a shocking sight. She was dressed in a sparkly sequined party dress that looked expensive, if a little torn and dirty. She had no coat, no bag, nothing. She just stood there, her thumb out, her face illuminated in the brief rhythmic sweep of my headlights. My company has a strict no riders policy, and my common sense told me this was a terrible idea. But she looked so out of place, so vulnerable. I imagined my own sister stranded out here, and I couldn't just leave her. I pulled my rig over, the air brakes hissing. She ran up to the passenger door, and I leaned over and opened it. She climbed in without a word, bringing a strange chill into the warm cab. She looked to be in her late 20s, her makeup smeared as if she'd been crying. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to sound friendly. She didn't look at me, she just stared straight ahead at the dark road, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "Away?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and brittle. "Okay." "Away?" "It is," I said, pulling back onto the highway. We drove in an uncomfortable silence for what felt like an eternity. The only sound was the hum of the tires on the asphalt. I tried to make conversation a few more times, asking if she was okay, if she needed some water. She ignored me completely, her gaze fixed on the darkness outside. There was a profound sadness about her, a sense of absolute despair that was so heavy it felt like a physical weight in the cab. After about 30 miles, I couldn't take the silence anymore. "Look, I can take you as far as St. George," I said. "Is that okay?" She finally turned her head and looked at me. Her eyes were hollow, empty of all light. "I just needed one more hand," she whispered, her voice filled with a chilling final regret. She slowly unclenched her fist and opened her hand. In her palm was a single heavy clay poker chip. It was an old one from a casino I didn't recognize, with a stylized S on it. I glanced from the chip back to her face, confused. "What does that mean?" I asked. When I looked back, the passenger seat was empty. She was gone. I hadn't heard the door open, hadn't felt the truck shift. She had simply vanished. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked around the empty cab, then at the empty desert outside. Nothing. I was alone. But I wasn't. Lying on the passenger seat, cold and heavy, was the poker chip. I drove the rest of the way to Salt Lake in a terrified daze. When I got there, I took the chip to an old pawn shop that specialized in Vegas memorabilia. The owner, an old man with a magnifying glass permanently attached to his eye, looked at the chip. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Haven't seen one of these in years. That's from the Sands. They tore it down in '96. He told me the story of a high-stakes gambler, a woman who was a rising star in the poker world. 20 years ago, she was in a legendary all-night game. She risked everything she had on a single final hand, and she lost. They said she just stood up from the table, walked out of the casino, and was last seen walking north along I-15 right into the heart of the desert. They never found her. What do you think would have happened if the driver had refused to take the poker chip? Let me know in the comments. My name is Ben. I'm a logistics driver, which is a fancy way of saying I haul stuff for the big casinos. It's not long haul. It's a weird, nocturnal job, moving things from one giant building to another in the dead of night. You move everything from pallets of liquor to stage equipment to furniture, and sometimes you move things that are best left forgotten. This job was a pickup from a storage warehouse in an industrial area far from the glitz of the Strip. These warehouses are where old Vegas goes to die. They're dusty tombs filled with the ghosts of failed shows and last year's theme. The work order was simple. Pick up crate 77B from Warehouse 4. The foreman, a grumpy old guy named Sal, unlocked the massive roll-up door. The air that hit me was thick with dust and decay and the faint, sweet smell of rotting fabric. He pointed into the cavernous darkness. "It's in the back against the far wall," he grumbled. "Just follow the aisle. Try not to get lost." He then retreated to his office to bury his face in a newspaper. I grabbed a pallet jack and headed in. The warehouse was a labyrinth of forgotten dreams. I passed giant peeling playing cards from some old magic show, rows of dusty silent slot machines and stacks of faded velvet ropes. And then I saw the mannequins. There must have been 100 of them, all from some long-canceled Parisian-themed show. They were showgirls, dressed in torn, faded costumes, their plastic smiles fixed and creepy in the dim light. Most were missing limbs or had cracked faces, but they were all eerily lifelike. As I navigated the maze, I got that classic feeling, the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see Sal, but there was nothing but shadows. I found the crate, a massive wooden box stenciled with 77B, and started the long process of hauling it back. As I passed the mannequin section again, I noticed one in particular. She was on the end of a row, a tall showgirl with a huge, elaborate headdress of faded pink feathers. I could have sworn she was facing the other way when I came in. I shook my head, blaming the poor lighting and my overactive imagination. I got the crate to the loading dock and went back to sign the paperwork with Sal. The whole process took maybe 5 minutes. When I walked back out to my truck, I froze. The showgirl mannequin with the pink feathered headdress was no longer in the aisle. She was now standing just inside the open warehouse door, about 10 feet away from my truck, half hidden in the shadow. Her head was tilted slightly as if she were curiously watching me. My blood ran cold. There was no way. Sal was still in his office. No one else was here. I jumped into my truck, not even bothering to close up the warehouse. I just wanted to leave. I slammed my own trailer door shut, locked it, and got the hell out of there. As I pulled away, I looked in my rearview mirror. The warehouse was dark, but for a split second I thought I saw the faint, pale shape of her standing in the doorway. For the rest of the night, a long, lonely drive to Reno, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I glanced at the dark, empty passenger seat, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw the faint, ghostly sparkle of a single pink feather. Do you think the mannequin was ever really in the truck? Answer yes or no in the comments. My name is Chloe. I haul specialty goods, which often means weird routes at weird hours, moving things that are too expensive, too fragile, or too secret for standard freight. This job was one of the strangest, delivering a single high-value sensitive server rack to a data facility built out near the Jean Dry Lake beds. If you've never been, it's hard to describe the emptiness of that place. It's a vast, flat expanse of cracked earth and salt, a prehistoric lake bed where the silence is so profound it feels like a physical presence, a pressure on your eardrums. The facility itself was a monument to anonymity. A new, windowless concrete box, stark and brutalist, looking completely out of place in the middle of the ancient natural desert. It had no signs, no logos, just a single reinforced steel gate. I arrived late. Around 1 a.m., the twin beams of my headlights cutting a lonely path through the absolute darkness. The delivery instructions were specific and simple. Pull up to the gate, kill the engine, and wait for the night shift engineer to open the loading bay. So I did just that. I turned the key and the comforting rumble of the diesel engine died, plunging me into a silence so complete it was disorienting. I stepped out of the cab to stretch, and the sheer scale of the quiet hit me. There was no wind, no insects, no distant traffic, nothing. The sky above was an incredible, breathtaking sea of stars, a dense, glittering canopy you never get to see with the city's perpetual orange glow. It felt like I was on the surface of another planet. After about 10 minutes of soaking in the quiet, I started to hear something. It was a low, rhythmic humming sound, so deep it was almost more of a feeling than a sound. A vibration I could feel in the soles of my boots and in the pit of my stomach. At first I thought it was my truck's reefer unit kicking on out of habit, but I was hauling a dry van. This sound was external. It was a deep, resonant hum, almost like a massive electrical transformer, but there was a strange musical quality to it, a discordant harmony of multiple overlapping bass notes. It seemed to be coming not from a single point, but from all around me, from the salt flats themselves, as if the very earth were singing a strange, electric song. The sound grew steadily louder, and the air began to feel strange, charged with static electricity. I could feel it on my skin, a tingling sensation like the moments before a lightning strike. The fine hairs on my arms stood up. A metallic taste like old pennies filled my mouth. Then my truck's radio, which was off, crackled to life with a burst of static. It wasn't music or a voice. It was a series of electronic tones, a complex, high-pitched chittering like an old dial-up modem connecting to the internet, but arranged in a complex, repeating pattern. It wasn't random noise. It was structured, intricate. It was a language, a signal. I felt a sudden, intense wave of vertigo and nausea, a dizzying sensation that made me grab the side of my truck for support. It felt as if the whole world were spinning, though I knew my rig was perfectly still on the solid ground. I looked out at the vast, dark expanse of the salt flats, and in the faint starlight I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. The ground itself was glowing. A faint geometric pattern of ethereal blue light was spreading across the desert floor, stretching for miles in every direction. It wasn't a projection. The light was coming from the cracks in the dry lake bed. Intricate lines of light pulsed in perfect time with the deep humming sound, forming a vast, impossibly complex circuit board etched into the very earth. The high-pitched signal from my radio was a perfect match to the rapid, flickering pulses of the lights. I wasn't just hearing a sound, I was in the middle of a transmission. I was parked on the motherboard of something vast, ancient, and utterly alien. The sheer scale of it was terrifying, a silent, beautiful, and horrifying broadcast happening all around me. Just as the humming reached a deafening crescendo that vibrated through my entire rig, making my teeth ache and the windows buzz in their frames, the main gate of the data facility let out a loud, industrial buzz. A voice, tinny and jarringly normal, came over the intercom speaker. "You the delivery from Phoenix?" The sound of the human voice shattered the spell. I looked back at the salt flats. The lights were gone. The humming had stopped. My radio was silent. The air was just air again. The profound silence of the desert rushed back in, leaving me shaken and questioning my own sanity. The gate rolled open and I drove my truck into the brightly lit loading bay. The engineer who met me was a young guy, probably not even 30, with pale skin and the haunted, tired eyes of someone who works nights and forgets what the sun looks like. I tried to act normal, going through the motions of unstrapping the server rack. but I couldn't shake what I'd seen. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "You guys ever hear a weird humming sound out here?" My radio was going crazy. He stopped what he was doing and gave me a nervous, haunted look, his eyes darting around as if he was afraid of being overheard, even though we were the only two people there. He leaned in closer. "We call it the signal," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It happens sometimes. The official explanation from the geologists is unusual seismic activity or piezoelectric effects in the quartz-rich soil. That's bullshit." He glanced back out towards the dark desert before continuing. "This place wasn't built here by accident. It's not about the cheap land or the isolation. We're not just a data farm. We're a listening post. All this," he said, gesturing to the server rack I had just delivered, "it's not for storing bank records or cat videos. It's for analysis, for decryption." He looked me dead in the eye, and I saw a deep existential fear in them. "We're not just storing data," he repeated, his voice trembling slightly. "We're listening, and we're terrified that one day we're going to understand what it's saying." "What do you think that signal was? A message from another world or something waking up from beneath our own? Tell me your theory." "My name is Marco. I'm a driver, but I don't haul goods you'd ever want to see. I operate a Vactor truck, one of those big loud rigs that serves as the city's iron intestine, cleaning out the storm drains and sewer lines underneath Las Vegas. It's a dirty, thankless job, but what people don't realize is that under the glitz and glamour of the Strip there's a whole other world. Hundreds of miles of flood tunnels, vast concrete arteries big enough to walk through. And people live down there. The forgotten, the lost, the ones who have fallen through the cracks of society. They call them mole people. We see their makeshift camps sometimes. Piles of dirty blankets, shopping carts full of scavenged belongings. The sad debris of broken lives. We have a simple rule. We don't bother them, and they don't bother us. We were doing a routine clean-out of a major outflow tunnel near Caesar's Palace. The job was simple: flush the line of silt and garbage to prevent flooding during the next monsoon downpour. It was about 4 a.m., that dead hour when the city above holds its breath between the last degenerate gambler stumbling out and the first early morning baker firing up his ovens. My partner Bob, a guy who'd been doing this for 20 years, was managing the high-pressure hose while I operated the controls from the truck top side. He was about 200 feet into the tunnel, a dark, dripping tube of concrete disappearing into the earth. Suddenly his voice crackled over the headset, tight and shaky in a way I'd never heard before. Marco, you're not going to believe this. There's a door down here." I laughed, the sound tinny in my earpiece. "A door? Bob, you've been breathing too many fumes. It's a concrete wall. There are no doors." "I'm not kidding," he insisted, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It's steel. A heavy steel door set right into the concrete wall of the tunnel where no door should be. It's old, man, rusted. It has no handle, just a small, dark, grimy window like on a prison cell." The conviction in his voice piqued my interest. Bob wasn't one for flights of fancy. Curiosity got the better of us. We shut down the powerful vacuum and water pump, and the sudden silence was almost as jarring as the noise. I grabbed a high-powered flashlight, unhooked myself from the control panel, and descended into the manhole. The air was thick and cool, smelling of damp earth, algae, and something vaguely metallic. I slogged through the ankle-deep water toward Bob's light. He was right. It was exactly as he described, and it was utterly wrong. In the uniform, curved concrete of the tunnel wall, a rectangular section was perfectly flat, and set within it was a massive, riveted steel door. It looked like something you'd find on a Wabudulupu-era bank vault or a Cold War bunker, ancient and completely out of place. Thick rust bloomed around the edges, but the door itself seemed impossibly solid. We shone our high-powered flashlights at the small, square window, but the glass was thick, dark, and coated with decades of grime on the other side. We couldn't see a thing. "What do you think it is?" I whispered, my voice swallowed by the damp acoustics of the tunnel. "No idea," Bob breathed. "It's not on any city schematic I've ever seen. This tunnel was poured in the 60s. This looks older." As we stood there contemplating the sheer impossibility of it, we heard a sound from the other side, a faint, dry, scratching sound. Scrap, scrap. It was a rhythmic, patient noise like long, hard fingernails being dragged slowly down a metal surface. Bob and I looked at each other, our eyes wide in the bouncing beams of our flashlights. The sound sent a primal shiver down my spine. Then came the tapping, a slow, deliberate tap. Tap, tap on the inside of the small window. It was a sound that implied intelligence. It knew we were here. We both jumped back, our hearts hammering. "What the hell is that?" Bob whispered, his voice cracking. The tapping stopped. For a long, terrible moment, there was only the sound of our own ragged breathing and the drip, drip, drip of water somewhere down the tunnel. Then a face appeared in the window. It pressed itself against the grimy glass from the inside, a pale, gaunt death mask emerging from the absolute blackness. It had large, obsidian black eyes that seemed to drink the light from our flashlights, reflecting nothing back. Its skin was the color of spoiled milk, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. Its mouth opened in a silent, agonized scream, revealing not human teeth but rows of sharp, filed points like a shark. It wasn't human. Not anymore. My mind flashed to the stories we'd heard, the urban legends about the tunnel dwellers who go too deep, who stay in the darkness too long. They said the darkness changes them, or that they find something else down there that does. This was one of them. It slammed its pale, long-fingered hands against the inside of the window, and the sound was a deafening crack that echoed through the tunnel like a gunshot. It wasn't trying to get our attention, it was trying to get out. We didn't wait to see more. A pure animal terror took over. We ran. We scrambled back through the water, slipping and sliding in our heavy boots, not daring to look back. I've never moved so fast in my life. We burst out of the manhole and into the pre-dawn light of the city, gasping for air that didn't taste of rot and fear. The first pink light of dawn was touching the top of Caesar's palace, and the world above had never looked so beautiful or so sane. We didn't talk. We just worked, sealing the heavy manhole cover back in place with a definitive metallic clang. On the official report, we logged a major structural blockage, a collapsed section of pipe that was too hazardous to clear. We recommended the entire section be permanently sealed off. Some places under the city were never meant to be opened. Some doors are meant to stay locked forever. What do you think was really behind that door? A forgotten government experiment or something much older? Tell me your theory. My theory is that it's something much older. A government experiment, even a forgotten one, implies plans, schematics, and a purpose tied to our modern world. That door felt ancient, and the creature behind it felt primal. I think that when the city's founders started blasting and digging to build their desert oasis, they broke into something that was already there, buried deep beneath the rock, a place that wasn't meant to be found. Maybe it was a pocket of life that evolved separately in the deep, geothermal-fed aquifers, a species that never saw the sun. Or maybe it was a prison built by people long before us to contain something they feared. The door wasn't built by the city to keep people out. It was an ancient seal, a plug against a tomb or a lair they inadvertently exposed. The mole people are just the most recent victims. They wander too deep, drawn by whatever whispers from the cracks, and they either get eaten or they get changed by whatever is behind that door. The creature we saw wasn't a mutated human. It was one of the original inhabitants, or perhaps a human who had been fully converted. The door isn't a forgotten project. It's the lid on a box that should never have been opened, and we were just the latest fools to come knocking. I'm a driver named Marco. I don't haul goods, I operate a Vactor truck, one of those big rigs that cleans out the storm drains and sewer lines underneath Las Vegas. It's a dirty job, but what people don't realize is that under the city there's a whole other world. Hundreds of miles of flood tunnels big enough to walk through, and people live down there. They call them mole people. We were doing a routine clean-out of a major tunnel near Caesar's Palace. It was about 4 a.m. My partner Bob was managing the hose while I operated the controls. It was about 200 feet into the tunnel when he called over the headset, his voice shaky. "Marco, you're not going to believe this. There's a door down here." I told him he was crazy, but he insisted. He described a heavy steel door set into the concrete wall of the tunnel where no door should be. It had no handle, just a small, dark window. Curiosity got the better of us. We shut down the equipment and I went in to see for myself. He was right. It looked like the door to a bank vault or a bunker, ancient and completely out of place. We shone our high-powered flashlights at the small window, but the glass was too thick and dark to see through. As we stood there, we heard a sound from the other side of the door, a faint scratching sound. Scrape, scrape, like long fingernails dragging down a metal surface. Bob and I looked at each other, our eyes wide. Then came the tapping, a slow, deliberate tap. Tap. Tap on the inside of the small window. We both jumped back. "What the hell is that?" Bob whispered. The tapping stopped, and a face appeared in the window. It was pale and gaunt, with large black eyes that seemed to drink the light from our flashlights. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, revealing rows of sharp, filed teeth. It wasn't human. Not anymore. It was one of the tunnel dwellers, changed by the darkness and whatever else was down there. It slammed its hands against the window, the sound a deafening crack that echoed through the tunnel. We didn't wait to see more. We ran, scrambling out of the tunnel and back into the pre-dawn light of the city. We sealed the manhole, reported a blockage, and never went back to that section. Some places under the city were never meant to be opened. Some doors are meant to stay locked. What do you think was really behind that door? A forgotten government experiment or something much older? Tell me your theory. My name is Will. I haul construction materials, steel beams, concrete piping, whatever the next mega resort needs to scrape a new piece of the sky. For a few months I was working the night shift, a job I both loved and hated. I loved the solitude and the cool desert air, a welcome break from the oppressive daytime heat. But I hated the feeling of being a ghost, delivering the bones of a building that would one day be filled with light and life, while I operated in the shadows. My destination was the site of a massive new casino going up just off the strip. By day it was a chaotic hive of activity, by night it was a different world. A skeletal city of steel and concrete rising into the night sky, lit by the harsh, sterile glare of industrial floodlights that cast long, dancing shadows. One night I was waiting for a crane to unload my flatbed of I-beams. It was around 2 a.m., the deadest part of the night, smack in the middle of a shift change, the usual cacophony of grinders, welders, and shouting. Men had died down, leaving an eerie, temporary silence. The only sounds were the low thrum of a distant generator and the faint, ever-present hum of the strip a few blocks away. That's when I heard it, the sound of a baby crying. It was faint at first, but unmistakably clear. seeming to drift down from the top floors of the unfinished structure. It was a thin, reedy wail, full of a distress so profound it made the hair on my arms stand up. My first thought was rationalization. I'd been on enough sites to know how they play tricks on you. The wind whistling through a narrow gap in the steel can sound like a scream. A loose piece of rebar vibrating can sound like a moan. It had to be the wind. But the longer I listened, the more certain I became. The sound had a cadence, a pattern of desperate gulping breaths between heart-wrenching sobs. This wasn't the wind. This was grief. My concern outweighed my fear. My mind jumped to a terrible, plausible scenario. A homeless person, desperate for shelter, had snuck onto the site with a child. This place was dangerous enough for trained professionals, let alone a baby. I grabbed my radio and called it into site security. A few minutes later, a golf cart bounced over the rutted dirt, and the security guard, a grizzled ex-cop named Al, pulled up beside my truck. Al was a fixture on the night shift, a man whose face was a roadmap of long nights and things he'd rather forget. His expression was grim, and he didn't seem surprised by my call. "Let me guess," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You heard the baby. You're hearing it too, huh?" The confirmation sent a shiver down my spine. I thought maybe someone was trespassing. Al shook his head, his gaze drifting up towards the dark skeletal tower that loomed over us. "You and everyone else on this shift. For the past 2 weeks, ever since they topped out the 40th floor, we've been getting calls. The sound of a baby crying always seeming to come from the highest, most recently completed floor. We've done sweeps. Me, a couple of foremen, even got Metro to bring a K9 unit out one night. We searched the entire structure, top to bottom, multiple times. We never found a thing. No sign of entry, no footprints in the dust, no blankets, nothing, just the sound." He leaned against the fender of my truck, the weariness of the years pressing down on him. "This city," he said, "it doesn't just pave over the desert. It paves over stories, paves over lives." He told me about the history of the land the casino was being built on. Before the first shovel broke ground, this multi-billion-dollar project was just another forgotten block of sun-bleached asphalt. And on that block stood the Stardust Palms Motel, a cheap run-down motor inn with a flickering sign and rooms that rented by the hour or the week. It was the end of the line, the kind of place people ended up when their luck, money, and hope had run out completely. Years ago, a story had briefly surfaced in the news, a small tragedy swallowed by the city's daily churn. A young woman, desperate and alone, had given birth in one of those grimy rooms. Overwhelmed by poverty and panic, she had wrapped her newborn in a thin motel towel, placed it in a dresser drawer, and walked out, vanishing back into the city's anonymity. The baby wasn't found for days. The Stardust Palms was torn down a few years later, erased to make way for this new monument to fortune. But Al believed the land remembered. He believed that some events are so traumatic they leave an imprint, a stain on the very place they occurred. "That sound isn't a memory," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper as he looked up at the dark tower again. "It's an echo of something terrible trapped in this place. We built this thing right on top of its grave, and now it's got a brand new tombstone 1,000 feet high." As he spoke, the crying started again, louder this time, closer. It was a heartbreaking, lonely wail that seemed to come from the very top of the steel frame, 50 stories up. It was a sound of pure abandonment, echoing in the vast, empty spaces of the unfinished casino. A ghost crying in a cold cradle of steel. We both stood there, 2 men dwarfed by the immense structure, listening to the sorrow of a child who had died long ago. Its cries now a permanent, invisible part of the building's foundation. The crane operator finally crackled over the radio, ready to start the lift, but for a long moment neither of us could move. We just listened. If you were a worker on that site, would you quit your job or try to ignore the sounds? Let me know in the comments. My name's Derek. I'm a fuel tanker driver, or I was until recently. My job was the city's circulatory system, a constant loop in and out of Las Vegas, hauling 9,000 gallons of high-octane lifeblood to keep the neon heart of the place beating. You see a different side of Vegas from the cab of a semi at 3 a.m. You see the grime behind the glamour, the desperation under the glitz. It's a city that feeds on souls, and I just fed the machines. One night I was at a grimy 24-hour truck stop on the industrial outskirts of town, a place that smelled of stale coffee, diesel, and regret. I was sitting in a cracked vinyl booth under a flickering fluorescent light trying to make my logbook look legal. That's when a man slid into the booth across from me. He was a walking contradiction, a ghost of the high roller life. His suit was a brand I recognized from the glossy ads in casino magazines, but it was rumpled and stained with something dark on the cuff. His tie was loose, his hair disheveled. His eyes were bloodshot, darting around the diner as if he expected the devil himself to walk in. He trembled with a frantic, desperate energy, a man running on the last fumes of adrenaline. "You a driver?" he asked, his voice a dry, raspy whisper. I nodded slowly, not taking my eyes off him. He was trouble. Every instinct I had, honed by years of dealing with the weirdos the desert spits out, screamed at me to get up and walk away. He leaned forward, the smell of expensive cologne and sheer panic wafting off him. His eyes were wild. "I need a ride, out of the city, anywhere. I'll pay you $5,000 cash." Before I could even process it, he unlatched a sleek aluminum briefcase on the seat beside him and opened it just enough for me to see inside. It was full of bundled $100 bills, stacks of them. It had to be at least $100,000, maybe more. I should have said no. I should have finished my coffee, gotten in my truck, and forgotten I ever saw him. But $5,000 for a few hours of driving, that's more than I cleared in a month. It was a down payment on a new life, a ticket out of this endless loop. Against every shred of my better judgment, the greed outweighed the fear. "Where to?" I asked, my own voice sounding distant. "Just east," he said, snapping the briefcase shut. "Take US 95, drive until the sun comes up, drop me wherever we are, no questions." He followed me out to my rig, a shadow clinging to my heels. He climbed into the passenger seat, placing the briefcase on his lap like a holy relic. As we pulled out of the truck stop and merged onto the highway, we drove out into the vast, empty desert. The transition was stark. One minute we were bathed in the perpetual lurid glow of Vegas. The next we were swallowed by an ocean of darkness, the only light coming from my headlights cutting a narrow path through the void. He never said a word. For hours, he just sat there, rigid, staring into my passenger side mirror, watching the lights of the city shrink behind us until they were just a faint, shimmering memory on the horizon. As we drove deeper into the blackness, I kept getting the feeling we were being followed. I'd catch a glimpse of a single pair of headlights far behind us, a pinprick of light keeping a perfect, steady pace. But whenever I'd stare at it in my mirror, trying to get a fix, it would vanish. I'd scan the road behind me and there'd be nothing but empty desert. A few minutes later, I'd glance again and it would be there. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the gambler's frantic energy was getting to me. It was just another traveler of the night, a trick of the light on the long, straight road. The miles rolled by in heavy silence. The gambler's knuckles were white where he gripped his briefcase. The only sound was the drone of my engine and the hiss of the tires on the asphalt. The darkness outside the cab felt absolute, ancient. It felt like we were the only two people in the world. About an hour before sunrise, when the eastern horizon was just beginning to soften from black to a deep indigo, the gambler finally spoke, his voice startling me. "Stop here," he said. We were in the middle of absolute nowhere. There was nothing on either side of the road but sand, rock, and the occasional skeletal Joshua tree. I pulled the tanker onto the wide shoulder, the air brakes hissing loudly in the profound silence. He got out, his movements stiff. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick stack of cash, $50 bills, crisp and new. He handed it to me without a word. He then looked back toward the west in the direction of the city we'd left behind. "They can have the rest," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "It's just paper. It was never about the money." Then he turned and walked off into the desert, away from the road, a solitary figure shrinking into the vast pre-dawn landscape. I sat there for a minute, the $5 feeling heavy and dirty in my hand. I was confused, unnerved, but mostly relieved it was over. I started the engine, ready to get back to a world that made sense. I had to turn the big rig around, a wide, slow arc that swept my headlights across the desert. As the beams passed over the spot where the gambler had been standing just moments before, I saw something that froze the blood in my veins. For a split second, illuminated in the full glare of my high beams, I saw another figure standing there. It was tall and unnaturally thin, dressed in a sharp, perfectly tailored black suit that didn't reflect the light but seemed to absorb it. But it had no face. Where a face should have been, there was only a smooth, featureless void, a silhouette of pure darkness, a hole in the shape of a man. It turned its featureless head towards me, and I felt a wave of cold dread that had nothing to do with the desert night. It was a coldness of utter finality, of a debt coming due. Then it too turned and glided into the desert, not walking but flowing over the sand, following the exact path the gambler had taken, its movements silent and impossibly smooth. I slammed my foot on the accelerator and didn't look back. I realized with sickening certainty that I hadn't just given a man a ride. I had been a delivery service. The gambler hadn't been running from a they. He had been running from an it. He had made a deal in that city of light and lost a bet he couldn't cover with cash. I had just delivered him to his debt collector. In Vegas, when you lose a bet to the wrong people, they don't just take your money. They don't break your legs. They take everything, and they always come to collect. I just drove the getaway car for the damned. Do you think the gambler escaped, or was he just delaying the inevitable? Tell me your thoughts.